Hey everybody, I'm sitting here at the track, trying to let it warm up a little bit this morning before I go work out. And I want to tell you about a couple of cases I had, not recently. Both of these are kind of a long time ago, but I was involved in a couple of cases. And the subject matter, there could be several subject matters. If you're a police officer or anybody who's going to be a witness, police officers are witnesses often. I was a police officer for 14 years and had to testify in court a lot. In that case, it would be about how to be more prepared to get on the witness stand and give testimony. If you're an attorney, this might be about how to prepare a witness to testify. But just in general, it's about critical thinking skills and confirmation bias and avoiding the pitfalls of the general human way of thinking that isn't very good often if you don't train yourself, don't prepare yourself to think through things. Critical thinking skills. So this video is about whatever you want it to be about, but a lot of cases I could talk about, but two cases come to mind where I think the points are most clearly expressed. So I'll jump right into them. The first one I'll talk about wasn't really my case. Another attorney handled the case actually, but I sort of sat second chair with him, a fellow named Robert, and him and the police officer that he represented. He represented a female police officer in Sherwood who got fired after she made a sexual harassment complaint, and then they were supposedly investigating her complaint. And the chief at the time is not a bad guy overall. I've known him for years and years, but just displayed extreme lack of critical thinking skills. And so he initiated an investigation of this gal's complaint, and as part of that investigation, sent her for a polygraph. And he had, in my opinion, extreme confirmation bias when looking at the results of the investigation. And this was the only time I ever saw a police officer get fired and then go in front of the Civil Service Commission and not get anything. I mean, get the chief completely reversed. Normally, like, they get fired and the Civil Service Commission will reduce it to 30 days off or 10 days off or something. This is the only time I ever saw in my 14 years as a police officer where it was just completely reversed. Just, chief, you're wrong, put her back to work, give her back pay. I mean, it was just completely reversed. And for good reason. It was really clear. So she's fired for refusing to cooperate in this investigation, right? Refusing to answer a question on a polygraph test. And the polygraph test was videoed, right? So what you think you're going to see if you're a member of the jury, if you're one of the people who's judging this, in this case, the jury was a group of citizens called the Civil Service Commission. What do you think you're going to see? If this lady gets fired, this female police officer gets fired for refusing to cooperate in an investigation, refusing to answer a question on a polygraph, you think you're going to see a video of them asking her questions and her saying, I'm not going to answer that. I refuse to answer that. And just not cooperating. That's what you think you're going to see, right? Well, it was all on video, and they played the video before the Civil Service Commission. And the attorney, Robert, told the chief, okay, chief, we're going to watch this video, and I want you to stop. Say stop right there. Whenever we get to the part where you think that she refused to cooperate with the investigation or refused to answer any questions. Okay, all right. So we'll start rolling the video. And the video is very clear that she never refused to answer a question or refused to cooperate with the investigation in any way. It was very clear. Here's what happened. The polygraph examiner said, I'm going to read you a list of several questions I'm going to ask you. I want you to be aware of them up front. I mean, the polygraph examiner, I presume, is trained to do this. Here's the questions I'm going to ask you. And he began reading down the questions. And then at some point he came to a question where she said, now wait, stop right there. I don't think that's a fair question, because the way this all went down, that question's not relevant. And I don't think it's a fair question. And so the polygraph examiner said, okay, if you don't think that's a fair question, I'm not going to ask it, because I can't really effectively ask you questions that aren't fair and on a polygraph. So yeah, that question's out. I won't ask that question. Okay. And then the rest of the questions, he asked them, she answered them, everything went fine. Now you may think, well, yeah, it's not up to her to say what questions are fair. She just has to answer all the questions. Some of you diehards out there may say that. No, questions on a polygraph have to be fair. They have to be relevant to the matter at hand. If a blue car drives by and the polygraph examiner says about this blue car, is that red car right there a Chrysler LeBaron? Yes or no? The person taking the polygraph is correct if they say, now wait a second, I don't think that's a fair question. You're asking me about the making of that car, what kind of a car it is, but you're building into the question something that I don't agree with. You say that it's a red car, and to me, I think it's a blue car, so I don't think that's a fair question. It needs to be rephrased, or it needs to be redone. At that point, it's proper for the polygraph examiner to say, okay, if that's not a fair question, it's not going to work on a polygraph, and so I'm going to exclude it. Okay, that's what happened. I mean, it wasn't about a car, it was about specific facts in the case, but that's what happened. So the video plays all the way through, and the chief never says, stop there, stop right there. Never happens. And so at the end of it, the attorney, Robert, says, Chief, you never did stop us. You were supposed to stop us at the point where you believe she refused to cooperate with the investigation. And the chief, he just sat there. And I don't remember him making any arguments, or like he just sat there. So the attorney said, let's go through it again. We're going to watch this whole, and it was a fairly lengthy video. Let's watch this whole video again. And at any point when you think she is not, cooperating with the investigation, say, stop right there. And then we're going to stop the video, and you explain why she was refusing to cooperate with the investigation. And so we watched the whole thing through again, and it was like a comedy show. I mean, once again, the chief never said anything, never interrupted, never stopped. And so the the attorney says, what went wrong, chief? And the chief did not have an explanation, had no explanation whatsoever for this not stopping the video and being able to point out at what point he thought that the police officer had refused to cooperate with the investigation. And ultimately, the chief absolutely lost his case and then got sued. The city had to pay this female police officer quite a lot of money for having to go through this experience. So then I went to the chief after it was over. I walked up in the parking lot out beside his car and said, Chief, what went wrong there? Until yet, he still doesn't understand. He can't believe he lost this case. He's flabbergasted. He just can't believe he lost this case when, he said to me something like, what am I supposed to do? Not take action when someone refuses to cooperate in an investigation? That would lose control. It would be just chaos. And I said, well, what do you think you have now? You've just lost this case. And then he agreed with me. He said, yeah, well, but his attitude never became one of, gosh, I guess I messed this up. I guess I didn't use good judgment. And it never became that. It was always, the Civil Service Commission didn't uphold, they don't stand behind me. And it's always that way, because these chiefs and mayors, they don't want to be questioned. Their position is, I'm the boss here. I'll do what I want, and you don't question me. That's what they want. But of course, Arkansas law, it isn't that way. So the chief and the mayor and everyone involved in the termination of that police officer used very poor judgment, very poor critical thinking skills. I can't imagine why their attorney didn't tell them, gosh, I can't imagine why their attorney didn't foresee and foretell that this was going to happen, because it was clear to me. It was clear to everybody. It was certainly clear to the Civil Service Commission members. So, anytime you're going to give testimony or you're going to take any action based on, and especially if there's a video involved, you have to step back objectively and look at the video. And you have to, not even objectively, you have to put yourself on the other side. I regularly ask myself, what would I do and say if I were my opponent's attorney? If I were on the opposite side, what would be my best argument? That is critical thinking skills. You have to be able to do that. I can't imagine why that attorney couldn't go through that ahead of time and say, here's my problem, Chief, with our case. What I'm seeing here is a situation where, thinking of it objectively, I'm not clear that she ever refused to answer that question. It doesn't look like that to me. Did they have a conversation like that? I don't know. Did the chief just tell him, I don't care, I'm the boss. By God, you work for me, put it out that way, and this is how we're going to do it? I don't know. I'm not clear what the plan was, but the plan didn't work, let me tell you. The other case I want to tell you about is a case where I was the attorney and I represented a police officer down in South Arkansas who was a captain, and he got fired. They made up a whole lot of, they had a laundry list of reasons the chief did that he fired this guy who was a captain, and they were all equally crap. They were absolutely ridiculous. And ultimately, I won this case and got him his job back and it was a significant amount of back pay. Now, we didn't sue like the other officer did, and for like discrimination. We didn't really have a super good lawsuit in that. But just the back pay was like 40 or 50 grand. I mean, it was a good, So, but I want to talk about one of the witnesses because I see this a lot. Now, this is where you police officers that are going to testify need to pay attention. This one is more about the witness side of things. They had a witness come testify that this captain was a horrible supervisor. The captain was, according to this witness and several witnesses, I'm just kind of picking on one of them because she was the worst. They said that he was overbearing. He micromanaged. He wouldn't let you make any decisions on your own. He was just this horrible supervisor who was very oppressive, and he treated you poorly. And so she gets up there and she gives this very passionate testimony about what a sorry supervisor he was, and how he was oppressive and all this stuff. So what do you think my questions were going to be of that witness? If you're going to get up there and you're going to testify about how this person was a horrible supervisor and made life miserable and made morale in the dirt, and put morale in the dirt, what do you think is going to be my questions for you? I mean, what do you think I'm going to ask? It should be clear. It should be clear. If you're an attorney prepping a witness, what do you think I'm going to ask? Well, of course, what I'm going to ask is, okay, and this is what I did ask. Can you give me some examples, specific examples of this guy being this horrible supervisor that you described? Give me some examples. I swear this lady didn't know what an example, she didn't know what that word meant, because I went through this like a lot of times, and she just kept saying, well, it was every day. He was just treated as horrible. Yeah, well, give me some examples, I would say. Well, just, horrible treatment, just oppressive, treating us like we were children, like we couldn't do anything on our own, not giving us any discretion. I mean, she kept changing up the same answer. Generally speaking, wouldn't give us discretion, treat us like children, micromanaged. And at some point, I had to break down for her what I was talking about. I mean, she didn't know what the word specific examples meant. She didn't know what that phrase meant. I said, ma'am, and this is a detective, by the way. I said, ma'am, a specific example, and when I ask you to give me a specific example, it should sound like this. You should start by saying, one day we were all in the squad room and what? One day What? I want you to tell me a story about one day, 1 minute, when my client did something that you believe was this oppressive act, She said, well, I can't think of any right now. And I said, I thought you said this happened all the time. Oh, it did. It's all the time. It's every day. Years and years of every day, all day long, making her life miserable, this supervisor that was my client. And there's thousands of examples, she said. And I said, okay, I'm not asking you to give me 1,000 examples. I'm just asking for one example. This is a trap that I often see witnesses falling into. They go and they testify generally that this situation existed, okay? But when asked specifically to give examples, they can't do it. They effectively take the position that there are so many examples of this over years and years, but they can't think of any single one right now. And that was the position this lady took. Eventually, she came up with an example. She said, well, one day I was just going to the bathroom. I was just going to the restroom, and he stopped me and said, where are you going? I couldn't even go to the restroom without him, micromanaging me such that he had asked me where I'm going, and the only place I was going was to the restroom. Well, okay, so there's a specific example. So then I asked her, I had her describe the layout of the building where their offices were. And come to find out, guess what? When she walked past his office to go to the restroom, the way the building was laid out, he couldn't tell whether she was going to the restroom, whether she was going home. Because the restroom is out by the exit door. And also, come to find out, back then, detectives in that town didn't carry mobile radios. They didn't have handheld radios. They had radios in their cars. But if they got out and got to interviewing a witness or a suspect and got into trouble, they couldn't call for help unless they could get back to their car. Now, they did have cell phones, but this was a number of years ago. And at that time, testimony was that there wasn't good cell coverage in this area. It's sort of a rural area in South Arkansas, and there wasn't good cell coverage. And so my client ultimately testified, I made them tell me or someone where they were going to be. If they were going out to interview a suspect about a burglary or something, I made them tell someone ahead of time so that we would know where to begin to search if they came up missing, if something happened to them. And he said, I don't remember that specific day she's talking about, but yeah, it's possible that if I saw her headed out the door, what to me was out the door, I might have said, hey, where are you headed? Yeah, it might have happened. Ultimately, it was pretty clear that he wasn't being a micromanager. He was just being a manager. That he was concerned about the well-being of his employees. He wanted to know what they were. Imagine you're at work all day and your supervisor wants to know what you're working on. Oh, how impressive is that? But this witness, this detective, female detective witness, was so unprepared. And I thought, did the city attorney, the chief's attorney, even talk to her about her testimony? I presume that at some point this was a guy attorney, I can't remember his name. I assume at some point he must have said, okay, so now you're one of the witnesses. What do you have to testify about? And right? At some point he should have asked her, what are you going to testify about? And then at some point he should have said, okay, so that's pretty general what you're saying. Can you give any specific examples? Like what sort of stuff are we talking about? No. I have to think that never happened. So people are grossly unprepared to testify. I see it all the time, and it's really bad with police officers. Well, police officers testify more than other people, so maybe it just seems like it happens a greater percentage of the time with police officers, but all the time they come up with these generalizations, and then when you say, I want a specific example, And especially when there's a video, like the first case I was talking about, where you're going to compare their testimony with the example. I see it all the time in DWI cases where they say, oh, he was, driving all over the road. And then you watch the video. This was another case in Sherwood where a police officer got disciplined. And ultimately, I sort of agreed with the discipline because he said, this guy's all over the road. And there's the video, and you watch, and he's not all over the road. Like, stop. If you asked him, stop the tape at some point where you think he's all over the road, and it was never, You have to be able to step back out of your shoes and be objective, or even, again, look at from the other side's perspective. What's their argument going to be? When I was in law school, we had an exercise. I remember one time, this was almost life-changing for me, where the class was divided into two groups. And one of the groups, they have these cases that are they're very close. Like, there's good arguments for both sides, right? There's a lot of cases like that. Seldom are things really cut and dried. Usually there are very good arguments for both sides. And this was one of those cases. And so they divided the class into two groups, and group A is going to argue, you have to take and argue this way, like that it's white. You have to argue that this thing is white. The other group has to argue that it's black, and there's good arguments on both sides. There's a lot of points, and you go through and you stress the points that show what you want to see. And, because that's what lawyers do a lot. And I remember I went through and I researched it, and confirmation bias took over in my brain. And I actually read all those materials and all those facts. And I didn't do, because I was brand new, I didn't do what I am advocating you should do. I didn't step back and be objective or look at it from the other side's perspective. I didn't put myself in the other side's shoes. I just saw it from my point of view. And I actually convinced myself that the materials were such that my side was right. I can remember actually thinking, man, I'm glad I don't have to argue the other side because they don't have anything, which was preposterous. The other side had just as much as I did. That's why the professor picked this subject matter, is because it was very divided. Sensible minds could differ on these points. So what happened was, there was one day set in the future when we were supposed to argue this case. One side that it was white and the other side that it was black. And when that day came, the professor, a lady, gosh, I can't remember her name right now. I can see her face. But she said, okay, everybody ready to give your oral arguments today on your case. Now, there's just one thing, she said. There's just one, we're going to make one little change here. Do you know what it's going to be? You know what it's going to be, right? You've got to argue the other side. You have to make the argument, not that you were going to make that it's white, but that it's black. And I just remember being flabbergasted. I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't. I remember saying the words out loud, I can't. And the professor, a lot of us did. And the professor's position basically was, well, that's a shame. Because if you can't argue the other side, you can't argue your side. You can't be a lawyer. You can't do the job. If you didn't read these materials and become familiar not only with the points that you're going to make and pound home, but also with the points the other side's going to make, if you can't do that. And at some point, I realized, gosh, I really let confirmation bias take over my brain. So if you're a police officer, you've got to, or anybody who's going to be a witness, you've got to step back on your DWI arrests, and you've got to think, what is the attorney for the other side going to say? What questions are they going to ask me? What's going to be, what question is it that I'm afraid of or that I don't want to answer? If you'll do that, not only will you testify better, but you will make better arrests. You will go out and do things better on the street because you're anticipating what someone's going to ask you about it later, and you'll have stronger cases. For you attorneys, I think I can talk with some authority about this. I've been an attorney for 15 years now, 14 years as a police officer, now 15 years as an attorney. And you have to go through your witnesses and think about, imagine you were the attorney on the other side. What would you ask that witness? And if you'll do that, if that lady, that detective down in South Arkansas had testified, he was this micromanaging, horrible attorney, and then with time, they could have had weeks for her to think of instances where maybe he did things that, the judge wouldn't like. And then that attorney should have drawn that out and said, okay, so generally you think he's a bad supervisor. Can you give me some examples? And then if she could have gone bam, 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 this example, that example, next example, I'd have had a hard case then. But as it was, I just smacked them around because they weren't ready. Because confirmation bias took over. They saw what they wanted to see, and they didn't see that there was another side to it, and they lost. And they lost big. So, a couple of cases I wanted to tell you about today.